From the moment Clark first realizes he is not like the other children in Smallville, Man of Steel sets a theme that will shape his life. Power isolates as much as it empowers. We watch a boy with a secret grow into a man with abilities that literally place him outside the ordinary rules of human interaction. The film's dialogue gives us direct windows into that isolation, lines that are not merely plot devices, but philosophical signposts. You will give the people an ideal to strive towards, Jor-El tells him. They will race behind you, they will stumble, they will fall. But in time, they will join you in the sun. That sentence is prophetic and paradoxical. It casts Clark as an aspirational figure, but it also distances him. He is the sun, and the rest of humanity races behind, never precisely alongside him. Clark's solitude is not an incidental trait, it is built into the premise of his powers. The more he can do, leap tall buildings, move at superhuman speed, endure blows that would kill any human, the less he can share the vulnerability that makes relationships mutual. This is clearest in his earliest interactions with his adoptive. Jonathan's advice is simple but devastating in its moral weight. You can't save them, Clark. Sometimes you have to let them die. That line is not just a refrain about limits, it becomes a crucible for Clark's conscience. It embodies the cruel logic of human attachment. To protect is to be implicated in harm, sometimes by failing to protect, and to possess the power to prevent suffering invites the perpetual moral question of when to act and when to abstain. You can't save them, Clark. The sentence presumes a human orientation, that there are limits and that acceptance of limits is a kind of human belonging. Clark's struggle is to reconcile that human ethic of limitation with his near-divine capacity. Zod's speeches accelerate the moral tension into ideological conflict. Zod claims kinship through origin, and through the promise of power's legitimate use, we can put things right, together. His rhetoric is full of certainty. He does not consider the quiet work of community. He imposes order. In his view, standing above others is not alienation. He offers Clark an alternative narrative: embrace your heritage, the code of Krypton, and rule with decisive will. But Clark rejects the certainty of Zod's worldview. When Zod says, "This isn't about you and I, Kal-El. This is about the future of our people," the line forces Clark into a binary choice between belonging to a people and belonging to humanity. The script makes that choice agonizingly clear. To side with Zod is to embrace an identity of supremacy. To resist is to claim an identity of service grounded in human value. Those human values are given voice in Lois Lane, who functions as both interlocutor and moral tether. She asks the questions Clark cannot always ask himself aloud. At times, she sees him more clearly than he sees himself. You don't owe these people anything. That line may at first read like a dismissal, but it actually acknowledges the alien nature of his existence. Lois recognizes that Superman's obligations are not simple reciprocities. He doesn't owe people in the way friends and neighbors owe each other. He owes them the exercise of power guided by compassion and restraint. The film lets Lois probe Clark's ethical interior with lines like, "You're afraid of who you are." She names his fear as a barrier to connection. Fear, in this sense, becomes self-protection, by remaining withdrawn, by never fully revealing inner truth. Clark tries to avoid the pain of being rejected or misused. Yet, that very withdrawal deepens his loneliness. Zack Snyder's visuals do more than impress. They amplify the moral note of the writing. When Clark moves through cities, the camera roots him in separation. People look up, mouths agape, while he is framed as a vertical anomaly. The dialogue enumerates the cost of that perception. "I know I'm not God, but I believe in people." It's a key contradiction, spoken by Clark with a humility that betrays his aspiration. He insists on belief in humanity even as he stands apart from it. That line is a hinge. Belief implies hope in mutuality, but his being apart illustrates how belief alone cannot create belonging. The film stages several intimate scenes that highlight the friction between power and ordinary human touch. In Moments with Martha Kent, Clark hears again the steady, unassuming ethic of home. You have to be the one who decides who you are. That line offers agency, yet it also isolates. His identity is not organically formed by reciprocal relationships, but by self-definition in solitude. To decide who he is, to choose a code beyond Kryptonian mandate or human expectation, is to set himself apart. Even when he seeks normalcy working at a desk, driving through a small town, flirting with Lois, his power functions like a glass wall, he can approach but cannot fully enter the texture of daily life without fear of tipping the balance from intimacy to danger. Dialogue in the film often functions as ethical interrogation. When General Swanwick asks him, "What if they hate you? What if this thing you do makes people fear you?" the question pierces the superhero myth. It's not a rhetorical worry. Fear of hatred is a real social force. The line captures the political consequence of exceptional power. Society might welcome a savior in times of crisis, but resent and fear the same figure in times of stability. That instability of status means Clark cannot root himself in steady attachments. Relationships become contingent on perception rather than on intrinsic mutuality. The film also uses verbatim confrontations to dramatize how Clark's choices generate moral solitude. In the climactic battle, he tells Zod, "I won't kill you." That refusal to execute marks a crucial ethical boundary. He will not become the judge and executioner, even in the face of existential threat. But the moment exposes a tragic irony. By choosing non-lethality for moral reasons, Clark allows destruction to continue, resulting in the deaths of innocents, and ultimately forcing him into a fatal decision when Zod kills civilians. Then, in the most wrenching line of the film, following the irreversible act, Clark says nothing at first. His silence is the most telling dialogue of all. Later, Jonathan's voice and memory return in the drama of his conscience. Jonathan had earlier insisted, "Do what's right, even if it hurts." That injunction, coupled with the film's images, reveals that Clark's moral isolation is the product of a paradoxical responsibility. He is supposed to do what is right while being unable to share the moral burden of such decisions with equals who can truly understand the calculus. The film repeatedly emphasizes that ordinary moral frameworks are inadequate for Clark. When Perry White calls him a great man, there is an ambivalence in the praise. Greatness flattens the contours of everyday companionship. It is a label that elevates but separates. Similarly, when Jor-El prophesies, "You will give the people an ideal to strive towards," the language of idealization converts Clark into an allegory, not a neighbor. Being an allegory is incompatible with being a friend. Man of Steel also problematizes the myth of the selfless outsider. Clark's power allows him to perform acts humans cannot reciprocate. The social expectation aroused by such performances becomes a weight. People want certainty and protection, but they also desire accountability and presence. Clark can provide rescue, but cannot be present in the slow, mundane ways that sustain intimacy. Shared meals, mutual vulnerability, the exchange of weakness. His moral isolation derives from this structural inability to participate in the grind of mutual reliance. In a telling line, a character says, "He reminds us of what we can be." To be reminded is different from being loved. Reminders do not require reciprocity, love does. The movie's use of direct dialogue repeatedly affirms that Clark's primary relationships are formative but asymmetrical. Jonathan's caution, Martha's compassion, Lois's curiosity, Jor-El's distant mandate, Zod's imperial certainty. All these voices shape him but never render him fully known. He remains, in effect, an object of other people's philosophies rather than a subject of shared life. That is the essence of moral isolation, being acted upon and acting in ways that preclude equal reciprocity. There is also a recurring theme of exile, verbalized in lines such as, "You're an outsider." Being an outsider is a social and existential condition. The film uses the term to mark the border between belonging and estrangement. Clark's alienation is literal. He is an alien. But the more important point is moral. His ethics must be made in solitude, because the community he serves cannot partake in the decisive knowledge he holds about consequences of action. That knowledge divides him from the collective. He cannot invite others into the calculus of supersonic rescues, of decisions that might save thousands and end one life. The solitude of ethical decision-making becomes the solitude of being superhuman. The narrative also interrogates the consolation of role-based belonging. Superman is a role with script and expectation: protect, inspire, never dominate. But role cannot satisfy the human need for mutuality. When Clark embraces the mantle, he also accepts its attendant loneliness. The film compresses this choice into the structure of its dialogue. Jor-El's instruction and Jonathan's admonition leave Clark with a binary: either rule as Krypton would, or choose humanity's messy ethics. He cannot do both. His eventual decision to stand with humanity is not a cure for his isolation. It is a deliberate acceptance of repeated moral pain. He becomes a steward of others' lives without reciprocal stewardship of his own interior pain. The language of the film also stages the public's ambivalence toward him. After demonstrations of power, questions are voiced. Is this our protector or our destroyer? That line stands in for the democratic anxieties that extraordinary power arouses. Even when Clark saves people, suspicion corrodes belonging. Knowing this, Clark cannot assume the kinds of attachments that sustain ordinary individuals, because the social trust he would rely on is unstable by his mere existence. Finally, the film offers a rare glimpse of the possibility of human connection for him, but even that is mediated through ethics. Lois's line, "I need to know who you are," is an attempt to cross the barrier. She desires to see him as a fellow person. He wants that too, but his refusal to become fully known is both protection and self-punishment. He fears that being fully seen will invite hurt or manipulation, and so he withholds. This withholding is a recurrent motif. It shields him, but also deprives him of the reciprocal vulnerability that makes belonging possible. In the film's closing sequences, Clark becomes a symbol, hope, perhaps. But he does so at the cost of persistent solitude. The conclusion implies that moral isolation is not a temporary hardship to be overcome. Rather, it is an enduring condition built into the structure of immense power. His line, "I have to help people," distills both the nobility and the loneliness of his vocation. The imperative is singular and solitary. It assumes that the state of exception, extraordinary capacity, places one outside the ordinary politics of trust and reciprocity. Man of Steel thereby stages a modern parable that godlike abilities create moral barriers that technology, wealth, or strength alone cannot dissolve. Genuine belonging requires mutual vulnerability and shared fallibility. Clark's power saves lives, changes outcomes, and inspires ideals, but it cannot, by itself, produce the dense network of reciprocal obligations and small intimacies that define being human among humans. The film's dialogue, Jor-El's proclamations, Jonathan's counsels, Lois' proddings, Zod's imperatives, functions as a chorus pointing toward the same conclusion: power must be matched by sacrifice and humility. And even then, the sacrifice will stretch into a private loneliness that only rare acts of trust might partially bridge. The question the movie leaves lingering is less heroic than humane. Can someone who can never truly be one of us learn to belong to us in spirit? The film answers ambiguously. In a final, soft exchange, Clark whispers nothing monumental. Rather, his presence becomes an act of ongoing commitment. He chooses the harder path of serving without full reciprocation. That choice is the film's moral core and its source of tragedy. Godlike power does not merely separate a man from his species by ability. It separates him by the structure of moral responsibility. And, in that separation, virtues take on the weight of solitude.